Welcome back to Cool Conversations. How's your week been? It's been a bit of a topsy-turvy one at home for me. I was up in Hoy at the weekend climbing the what's known as the Old Man of Hoy with a client. And I dropped my phone. So I spent the last 5 days without a phone, which many of us probably think is an absolute disaster. But it's been so refreshing. So I say to each and every one of you, put your phone down or your devices down for a day or so and see how you feel afterwards. It's been quite a revelation for me. Anyway, time to dive in with our guest this week. This is a man that I've known for a number of years now through a sponsor that we both have. It's a shameless plug for Land Rover, because Land Rover do support the amazing work that this man does, and they also very kindly support myself in my own adventures. How do you describe somebody that's almost single-handedly trying to save African wildlife? I know that he won't say that. He will say it's the team around him because he's so humble. But for me and my family, this man has been a huge inspiration. The children, they think what Charlie does is amazing. We think what Charlie does is amazing. And we have him here actually in the studio for a change, which is why I'm slightly nervous. But without further ado, we're going to dive into the conversation with my good friend and the founder of Tusk, Charlie Mayhew. How are you, Charlie?
I'm really well. I'm flattered to have had such a ridiculous introduction. You're quite right. It's definitely not a one-man show. There is a big team, or actually quite a small team that is behind the whole Tusk organisation. So it's definitely just not me on my own.
Now, you say that, but I do know you're being somewhat humble. Now, let's just take it back a little bit. For those who don't know what Tusk is, you founded it in 1990?
Correct, yeah.
Just give us a top line, just in a few minutes, of what exactly Tusk does.
Very simply, Tusk is an African conservation charity that, as you said, I set up in 1990, having sort of had the opportunity to travel to the continent and fell in love with it. But although our name is synonymous with perhaps tusked animals like elephants and rhinos, our remit is much, much broader than that. And we have a portfolio of projects that we cover a whole raft of endangered species, from turtles to gorillas to cheetahs or whatever. And of course, the landscape and the natural habitat that they exist in. But our philosophy has always been that the long-term success of conservation is totally dependent on the communities and the population with which they coexist. And so a lot of our work, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, is also based on community relations and using conservation to improve the livelihoods of the communities that live alongside wildlife.
Fantastic. And just, so obviously, well, we know one another quite well. I think possibly the last time we met was in Frankfurt. Remember that, at the launch of the Defender? And you got hijacked by the lovely girls that look after the sponsorship side of Jaguar Land Rover. And I remember seeing you the following morning looking a little bit worse for wear. I think they're taking you out drinking somewhere.
I was desperate to get back to my hotel room, but they just wanted to keep going. And I was amazed at how sort of bright and breezy they were first thing the next morning as we went to go for that launch of Defender. And you had the fun of driving the...
coming down the ramp, yeah, climbing up, etc., etc. Yeah. Now, I mean, we're both very lucky to have Jaguar Land Rover as a supporter for both of us. But to what extent have they been sort of fantastic or great for? I mean, assuming that they have been really good for Tusk. How did that relationship come along?
Well, it's such a natural fit for obvious reasons that Land Rover. I think that you only have to sort of look back at the old films like Born Free or whatever, and they're so sort of evocative of Africa and conservation. Is you always used to see Land Rovers trundling around, with the rangers or with safari guests or whatever. So they are a natural fit for us, and a lot of our projects, all our projects, need four-wheel drive vehicles of some sort, and so they've just come on board over the last 15 years, really, as a very strong corporate partner for the charity and helping to promote the work that we do. So we're immensely grateful to them.
Yeah, they are fantastic. I have to say, I was slightly jealous that you got to go out to Namibia on they had like a PR launch of the new Defender, didn't they? You got to go out there, which looked great fun.
Absolutely, that was a lot of fun. But actually, last year we took one of the new prototype Defenders out to Kenya. And it was all under one of those sort of wrap schemes, so you couldn't really recognise it properly. But we put it through its paces at the Borana Wildlife Conservancy in Kenya, where we work, and so we did some filming there over a few days, and then I was very fortunate to be invited to come out and help sort of present the partnership to the international media that were basically, brought out to Namibia, and where we've got a lot of work and programs that we operate there. So it was a lot of fun putting the cars through its paces in incredible landscape.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it probably the Land Rover that you actually had as a prototype was when we were in Kazakhstan shooting the launch video. One of the ones that we only had 2 Defenders there, and one of the ones we had done nearly 1 million miles, I think. It was something outrageous. So perhaps it was the one that you had. So just talk us through TUS. So it's African conservation. Is it right across the continent?
Absolutely.
I mean, I presume you've got hot spots.
Yeah, we absolutely, and it is. I mean, we will look at anything within the African continent, and including Madagascar. But by and large, I suppose that our portfolio, if I can call it that, of project partners that we work with and support, there's a heavy weighting towards East and Southern Africa, much more so than Central and West Africa, where it tends to be a little bit more difficult to operate, and there just seems to be a lot more success with conservation in East and Southern Africa. So we are definitely heavily weighted to those regions.
Is that because it's a bit more stable? I mean, I've worked in parts of West Africa, and it was a little bit like a frontier town. So I was working in Equatorial Guinea, and it was somewhat loose, shall we say.
I've never been there. There is a chimpanzee project that we support there, and part of the problems for us, for instance, going there is that project, to get there, it's sort of like a 5-day expedition into the jungles or whatever, and so it is much more difficult doing conservation in West and Central Africa, and the political circumstances often aren't, very helpful, and some of these places are incredibly remote and difficult to get to. I mean, I went through West and Central Africa before I set up TUS, and I did this overland expedition.
That was filmed. There was a documentary on the back of that, was there not?
Yes, we did a fly on the wall documentary for Channel 4. It was a bit like a sort of cross between I'm a Celebrity, we get me out of here, and Big Brother, I suppose, because
it would have been an early reality.
It was early reality. I mean, I'm not sure I could claim to be one of the first reality TV people, but it was an amazing trip that really sealed my love of Africa and probably set me on this path of setting up TUS. But certainly for that expedition, which was 7 months driving from London to Cape Town, coming down through the Sahara and through sort of that West and Central Africa bit was really tough and very difficult. And I think it's only got worse, actually.
So to try to put things into it, so you would have done that 7 months trip. It was late 80s.
Mid-80s.
Mid-80s.
85, yeah. It was basically, I was about 25 years old.
So fast forward, what's that, 35 years or so to where we are now. What sort of changes have you personally seen in that part of Africa?
I think that what we've seen, very sadly, is just massive loss of wilderness and habitat and wildlife. And, you know, it's been a pretty, I was going to say a steady progression, but actually it's been worse than that. It's been almost precipitous the way it's, you know, come about in some places. You know, that expedition, as I say, really was the one, the thing that really made my mind up that I wanted to try and do my little bit to try and help conservation.
So just interrupting. So what was the catalyst? So, you know, you're bouncing your way down in your, I don't know, Series 3 Defender or whatever
I
you've
wish
got.
it was a Series 3 Defender.
So you're bouncing down through Africa. So there must have been something about it that touched you that then threw you into conservation, because it would be quite easy to do that journey and not be necessarily as invested in the culture, in the conservation of wildlife as you are.
Well, I set up the expedition, you know, to be brutally honest, as an adventure for a lot of young people, fun people, you know. But it sort of evolved, having originally going to be just a few mates getting in a Land Rover. That was the original hope. But sadly, I didn't have contacts at Land Rover at the time, so we didn't get support from Land Rover. So we ended up actually with a Portuguese manufacturer called
Oh, I've seen them. Yeah. Do they still make those?
I don't know, actually.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I saw little boxy.
Yeah, the funny little things.
They may be quite capable, though.
They weren't bad.
Yeah.
They weren't bad. So, but what ended up, as I say, originally going to be 1 or 2 vehicles, ended up being 8 vehicles and a team of 33 people.
Crikey.
From all over Europe. So it became a blind date for young people from.
It is a reality TV program.
Reality TV.
It's like Love Island or whatever that thing's called.
Well, that was then okay. So, human nature is really interesting, because how quickly members of the team paired off on that expedition was extraordinary. The moment we hit the Sahara Desert and we was sort of out in the desert, you know, you know, it just amazed me how quickly.
Your couples disappearing off the
how quickly the sleeping bags sort of got closer together. So I put this team together, 7 nationalities, all walks of life. You know, we had a postman from Hamburg, we had you know, a youth worker from Brixton. We had it was a complete cross section of society. And so in itself, it was quite an interesting human experiment, as it were. But in order to try and give the expedition some reason to be, we decided we had to take on some projects so that it wasn't just seen as some sort of jaunt across Africa. And so I talked to actually WWF in the first instance and said, look, you know, I'm going to have this group of young kids eager to do something, roll up their sleeves. You know, is there anything you could recommend? And they put us in touch with Kenya Wildlife Department, and we ended up putting up part of the perimeter fence at a place called Lake Nakuru National Park. In the Rift Valley, because they wanted to introduce rhino. They wanted to create a rhino sanctuary in the park. And so we were given this bit of section of fence line to put up the fence. And we spent 6-7 weeks living in Nakuru National Park.
Wow.
Which was an incredible experience. And I think that was really the moment that I suddenly started to sort of take a real interest in wildlife and conservation and the issues that we're facing, particularly rhino and elephant at that time.
Because you would have been about 30-ish when you founded Tusk.
Yeah.
Which seems like quite a young age to throw yourself in? Because you've been working in financial services, insurance, or something else.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
And I did notice somewhere that you sold a business to St James's Place, who actually have their head office in Cirencester right here.
They do.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it seems like quite a young age to throw yourself in. So you've segued out of essentially working in a city or a city-based job.
Yeah.
And then you've got to start a charity from scratch. It must have been totally overwhelming.
Well, it wasn't overwhelming because I never saw it like. I mean, if I'd thought that Tusk was going to get to where it is today, I probably wouldn't have done it because I probably would have been scared off. But at the end of the, we basically created the charity it was a hobby. It was just meant to be, the idea was that we once or twice a year we'd organise some sort of party or event to raise a bit of money, and it was our way of putting something back into a continent that I loved, and so I never actually envisaged it really getting beyond raising a few £1,000s a year. But slowly but surely, it just built up a momentum and a following, and now today, we raise about £10 million a year.
Like I say, it's pretty colossal now. I mean, I've been to a couple of your fundraising events in London, and they are always so memorable. And your celebrity list, if you were to now do a reality television, I mean, your black book must be immense. And I suppose at the top of that must be His Royal Highness. Just so Tusk has a royal patronage.
Yeah.
I heard Prince William speak. Was it last year? I can't remember. He does seem to be very passionate and invested, not simply in Tusk, but in African conservation as a whole.
Yeah. Actually, it's a global conservation.
How did that relationship come about? Because it's fantastic for Tusk.
Well, as I had during my gap year, I'd gone to Africa. So pre the expedition, I had a spell in Africa, and that's what sort of sparked my original interest.
So on your resume, it was 2 years in some rather spurious, like Switzerland and Africa. You seem to be travelling the.
Yeah, I think much to my parents' horror, actually. I was going to go and do engineering, actually, because I am a bit of a petrol head. I don't know much about cars, but I'm a bit of a petrol. I love motor racing and all that stuff. And so my original idea was leave school, go into engineering, because I wanted to get into F1, basically.
Oh, wow.
That's what I wanted to do, is get into one of those F1 teams in some way. Anyway, that all went out the window because I started travelling, and the travel lust sort of really took over for a couple of years before I came back to London and got into insurance and then financial services. But going back, so the point with our patron, with Prince William, is that he spent part of his gap year in Africa, in Kenya, and particularly at a place called the Lewa Wildlife Conservancy, which is really one of the at the forefront of conservation in not only in Kenya but within Africa, and been a long-standing partner of ours. So we were already working with Lewa and supporting Lewa, and Prince William ends up going there as part of his gap year. So that was his introduction to Tusk.
Fantastic.
And so we were really fortunate, and I took a call out of the blue, not from him, but from his polo manager, saying
he probably lives up the road. We've got numerous polo.
Yes, exactly.
Places up the road
saying
here.
that both he and Prince Harry had agreed to do a charity polo match, and they wondered whether we would like to be one of the beneficiaries.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the moment where I actually met him, and he does have a very genuine passion for Africa, its people, and wildlife, and Africa, as you possibly know, it has this ability to really get under your skin, and it's like an infection. I always sort of say that if I haven't been out to the continent I sort of start to suffer from withdrawal symptoms. I need that sort of rush of African, whatever it is.
Yeah, I know exactly what, I don't know how you felt during lockdown, but I felt a little bit like a caged animal at times. I have been out to Africa But what you talk about, I certainly feel with the Himalayas. You know, the people, the place, the scenery, just the way of life there. And even it sounds ridiculous, but you can be in northern India, and the sunsets that you get with all the sort of dust haze, there's something very special about it. And as you say, it's infectious or addictive, or I don't quite know what it is.
I also find that with Africa that I have this sort of sense as soon as I land and sort of get off the plane, wherever it is, Nairobi or, you know, wherever, I have a sense I'm coming home. And I can't, that's the only way I can describe it. And there's something about as soon as the aircraft door opens and you get that smell of that earthy smell of Africa.
It's a waft, isn't it? It's like a tsunami of emotion.
Oh, it's just fantastic. I love it.
God, that is so interesting, because when I go, I mean, let's use Nepal as the example. I go to Nepal, I step off the plane. It's almost like an alter ego to the person that I am here. It's almost a second life. I mean, yes, of course, I'm invested here, I've got the family here, the business is here, and all those things. But there's something about Nepal. I mean, like you with Africa, I mean, there's so much. I know it so well. I've got so many friends there. And it is a coming home ritual. It's like, the door opens, the noise and the smell and the differences in your food.
Have you taken your family yet? Sort of?
Not yet. No, not yet.
You know, I tell you, you know, so for many years, my kids are older than yours, but for many years, of course, my kids would just sort of see me disappear.
Oh, that sounds familiar.
You know, I thought it might be. And they sort of, you know, they used, when they were young, you know, I think they was quite unsettled because they had no concept of where I was going. You know, I was just going to the sort of, you know.
Daddy's off to work somewhere.
Yeah, well, and off to Africa and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, but the moment I was lucky enough to take them out there, it made such a difference, because now they can relate to where I am, who I'm with. You know, they don't know all of them, but you know, they've met a lot of the people, and they, and I guess I've instilled in all of them actually now a passion for Africa as well. But it was interesting from a family perspective how it did help the sort of. Probably helped my wife quite a bit actually, because you know I wasn't leaving the kids sort of.
No, that's super interesting actually, because for me it's always been, because I go to Nepal or India predominantly for work, and it's just trying to find the balance. But so certainly my children who are 10 and 7, yeah, they do know a little bit about the Himalayas. They met some of the Sherpas who come across and stayed with us. But there's something I've got to say a huge thank you for is, and it's just up the road here. It's the Cotswold Wildlife Park.
Yes, absolutely.
And I remember. It was last year, I think. God, time flies. I think it was last year. You arranged for us to go and see the newborn baby rhino.
Yes.
Because your very good friend, it's
Reggie Hayworth, whose family owned the wildlife park, and
it is fantastic. I don't know when you last there, but it is fantastic.
No,
it's just on the
great.
doorstep here.
We actually have
Fabulous.
tusk offsites there.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. We in the main house, and we gather sort of our board of trustees and the executive team, and we have these offsites there, and it's a great spell. And then sort of during the lunch break, we go off, go and see the rhino. Or
got the rhino. And I think one of my favourite is they've got a red panda. It's always stuck up a tree somewhere, and you can stand underneath it for ages trying to see this damn panda that's sort of clinging to a tree.
Well, no, we've been very lucky at Cotswold Wildlife Park. You know, through Reggie. Reggie was on our board of trustees for a number of years, and he's been a fantastic supporter of the charity. So, you know, they support a number of projects, you know, through us, and actually we've been very fortunate with, you know, a number of wildlife. Longleat, which I know you went to recently.
Yeah, went to it just opened from lockdown. We took the children. Never been there before. I can't believe I've never been there before. It's another fantastic, I mean, truly fantastic resource.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great fit, and
well.
they've been. And you remember that they had that TV series Animal Park with Ben Fogle and.
Well, I know Ben very well, but we don't have a television at home, so all this sort of things all passes us by. So I've never seen it, but I knew Ben was involved with Longleat, and he speaks incredibly fondly of it.
And so when they were sort of really in full flight of making those Animal Park series, we did a number I can't remember how many it was now, where we took the keepers out to Africa.
Oh, wow, cool.
And filmed with them in situ. And for the keepers, you know, they'd never been in that sort of environment at all, and it was just fantastic. And we made some great programs actually, out there as part of that. And then the other, actually, Woburn Safari Park's another one that's been, they've been very supportive.
Yeah, I've not been there either.
Yeah.
So there's another one that I need to get to. Now, this came as quite a surprise to me. I think it was at the last Tusk Awards, which we'll get on to in a minute, because I think that's a fantastic event that you celebrate. Some of the local people that do fantastic things out in the field. But something which I only learned about relatively recently, because we hear so much about anti-poaching and about the importance of trying to stamp out poaching, which is clearly an important thing. But in terms of African wildlife, the danger, and this isn't belittling the danger of poaching, which is a terrible thing, but I was really surprised to hear that poaching isn't the biggest issue that we as a collective, but especially you guys, are pushing back against, is it?
Yeah, so I think that, we're all very familiar with some of the terrible statistics, of the decimation of elephant populations, rhino populations, lion populations. And they're pretty shocking.
And graphic photographs at times.
And that's all related to the illegal wildlife trade. And the illegal wildlife trade is worth, supposedly up to $20 billion a year globally.
Wow.
So it's huge business, and it's all run by international organized criminal networks. So that is a massive challenge, and there has been the focus of a lot of attention by conservation NGOs like ourselves, and indeed governments as well, to try and tackle this issue. And whilst it has been responsible for the decimation of elephant populations from 700,000 in the late 80s to now less than 350,000. And the lion population today, most people don't know this, is the lion population is now less than 20,000 lions left in the wild today in Africa.
Totally?
Total.
20,000, but less than 20,000.
Possibly less than 20,000. And that's been brought about by a combination of issues. But it's been exacerbated recently by the illegal wildlife trade, because there is now a growing trade in lion parts.
I was going to say, but what I know why elephants get poached and and the horn for the rhino, but what is it about?
So lion parts, they
help?
it goes to the Far East, basically, and primarily, and it gets used in all sorts of sort of weird and hocus pocus stuff. So it's
wow, less than 20,000 lions.
It's tragic. And it's shocking. But going back to your point, is that actually the biggest train coming down the track that all conservationists are probably more worried about is loss of habitat. Because, and this is a global issue. It's not just peculiar to Africa, but Africa is probably the last place on earth where you truly have got a sort of spectacle of the megafauna like elephant and rhino and lion or whatever to go and see. But the human population is set to double in Africa from 1.2 billion today to 2.4 billion in the next 30 years, by 2050. The pressure that this explosion in the human population is putting on land and wilderness areas is just huge. And so increasingly what we're seeing is that whilst most countries have got a degree of land under national parks or national reserves, a country like Kenya has probably 70% of its wildlife living outside national parks. And so in those rural areas, that wildlife is being squeezed all the time into smaller and smaller areas. And as it gets squeezed, particular species like the predators or the elephant are coming into conflict with those human populations. Elephants can do enormous damage, trampling crops and eating, and then of course lions and hyenas and leopard and cheetah and the big predators, can do enormous damage in taking domestic livestock. So you get this terrible conflict, and that's really, human-wildlife conflict is a really big growing issue that it needs to be faced, because we've got to somehow reconcile the value of human livelihoods and clearly on the one hand, but there is a real value to to nature and to wildlife, and so and the danger is, and we're already seeing this, is that what used to be large sort of connectivity of landscape is being broken up into islands.
So isolated little areas that...
Yeah, more and more isolated. Now, for some species, that doesn't really matter. But again, when you've got the sort of big species like, elephant that need to migrate over large areas of, large landscapes, if they've got to keep on walking, trampling through community lands, whatever, it becomes, very destructive.
So, we don't have a crystal ball, obviously. Is anybody mooting solutions? Because, I'm guessing that national parks are all well and good, but there's a finite size to national parks, and even they potentially are going to be pressurized to maybe give up land somewhere in the future. You just need to look at America and see what our friend over there, Mr. Trump, is doing with some of their sort of not quite national parks, but they're finding oil under some state parks, and all of a sudden the
economic
sanctuary is being taken away.
The sort of economic and political, temptation to undermine the sort of the sanctity of national parks, national reserves is always there, and
is that through corruption? Because the bits of Africa that I've been to has always been, it's not borderline corrupt. It is corrupt.
Look, clearly in certain cases, corruption is a major factor. But I'd say by and large, actually, most African national parks appear to be pretty safe, but as I say, if we ended up just resorting to national parks, then conservation would have failed dramatically, because we would have lost so many species and so much in the way. And I just don't think actually, we can afford to do that. I say we in the sense of the human population, and not just we as Westerners, because I'm extremely sensitive and aware of this. Can't be about the Western world or the developed world telling Africa how it should run its.
No, not at all.
But there's a real value in nature and the natural world, and I think that actually. You mentioned the Tusk Awards. There was a Tusk Awards we had a few years ago, and David Attenborough gave the most amazing speech. And one of the things I always remember him saying is that the humankind is sort of losing our connection with the natural world. We live increasingly in an urban society, and we've sort of forgotten about nature and how important it is to us. And actually, fun enough, the lockdown, I think, has been quite a good moment for us to sort of take stock.
Yeah, I would hope so, because I think that loss of connection is simply accelerating. Certainly with my children, we're very lucky. We live up the road from here. We live at the edge of a farm field, and we can simply step outside into nature. At the same time, it is a struggle to get the children outside sometimes. The addiction to YouTube videos or Minecraft or whatever it is a powerful pull. Yeah. Once you get them outside, then it's an entirely different ball game. Wow, and they are invested. And certainly, chatting to Jazz, the lovely Mrs. Cool, she is so desperate to get the children out to somewhere like Africa, to get them invested as young as possible.
Absolutely.
So they then bring that enthusiasm back, and they will hopefully be the stewards, like to a certain extent you have, for the next generation. But it's that loss of connection that is dire.
It is so important. I think it's essential. And I think that, you know, in terms of Africa, you know, one of the things that, you know, we are, I think, all trying to do as best we can is to elevate the value of what we call natural capital that these countries have got in all its guises. And I suppose it's most obviously seen through the value of tourism, safari tourism. You know, for a lot of these countries, it's a significant contributor to their GDP, and it employs
thousands,
hundreds of thousands of people across the continent. So, you know, there is a very, you know, significant and immediate economic benefit to them, you know, looking after this wildlife. But it's how do you elevate that it as a political priority at, you know, to the, you know, at the government level, amongst politicians who primarily are living in cities, who themselves have probably lost that connection with the natural world. Yeah. And you've got and of course they are responding to their electorate, who are,
they've also lost their connection.
You know, living in urban environments. But, you know, at the end of the day, you know, every breath of air we take and every mouthful of food we take comes from the natural world.
Yeah, it does.
You know, and so we have to learn to look after it. And I really hope that this pandemic, you know, gives, you know, has created the opportunity where people will stop and think a little bit more.
Well, I mean, let's hope so. But, you know, while you touched upon COVID, I mean, how has that impacted you guys? I know that you had a really cool marathon lined up. Was it out in Kenya? Yeah. So something like that, which had to be canned, but it went online.
Yes.
Because my two children ran 6K in the wind and the rain.
Fantastic.
And they were so pumped at the end of it, and you sent through a beautiful little certificate. So it sounded like that was a successful fundraiser, but you had to pivot quite severely.
Absolutely. It was an experiment. That you know, we have this amazing marathon which we've done for 20 years.
Is that how long you've done it for?
20 years at the Lewa Wildlife Conservancy, the place where Prince William spent his gap year. And it's been an amazing event. That it's actually a marathon and a half marathon. We offer both options.
It's probably pretty hot. I mean, I've started running in the last 18 months or so. I mean, I don't do very well in the heat.
And it's altitude as well.
So it's altitude as well.
Yeah. So
you've got it all in there.
It is regarded as one of the sort of the tougher marathons out there.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
You know, probably not as tough as Everest or something like that. But it's anyway. So it's a fantastic event, and it normally raises about $500,000 a year for us for a whole raft of different projects of community-related programs, education, healthcare, and obviously conservation in Kenya. And it's become a big part of Kenya's sporting calendar, the Lewa Marathon. So, of course, we had to cancel it.
And do you get all the local, the local runners, but the Ethiopians and the Kenyans, they all come together?
Exactly. And, you know, even Eliud Kipchoge has been out to run it. And so it's fantastic. You have the local Maasai and Samburu guys who are running, you know, barefoot alongside, you know, sort of overweight business bankers from London or New York or whatever. You know, it's a brilliant event. It's absolutely brilliant. So this year we had to suddenly change all of that and say, no, okay. So we decided, well, okay, let's try and do this as a virtual event. And it's raised. I actually heard today. I think we're just shy of $300,000 having been raised.
Wow.
And we had over 2,000 people taking part. So
that's pretty good, because that changed kind of last minute, didn't it? And it was a tweet that you sent out that I think it was you or Tusk or somebody sent a tweet out, and I remember looking at it going, wow, that's really cool. You know, I get the children involved with that. I mean, perhaps moving forward is something that you could do. Potentially you could do both.
Well, absolutely, and that's exactly what we're now thinking. Is that next year's marathon, you know, hopefully will go ahead in situ. But there's no reason why we couldn't make it a hybrid version, whereby those people who, you know, maybe can't afford to go out to Kenya to do this event, because it's obviously not that cheap to go out for a long.
No, absolutely not. You're not just going to go out for the afternoon either.
No, exactly. So, we, that's what we're definitely thinking of offering both options. And actually, funny enough, on the back of the success of that marathon, we are now, a few days away from launching a new initiative, which is actually geared towards supporting rangers right across Africa. On the 31st of July is World Ranger Day, and we will be announcing a new initiative that we've got with a significant backing of a major philanthropist. Because the one thing that's happened as a result of COVID-19 has been, a dramatic fall off of income for Africa and tourism and park fees and everything else. So what that's resulted in is rangers either losing their livelihoods or jobs, or being furloughed in some way, or at best having their income cut dramatically. And trust me, they don't earn a lot of money anyway. No. And these guys, these men and women, literally put their lives on the line every single day. And so what we are trying to do with this new initiative is just ensure that we hold the front line, and that we get these rangers back at work, deployed into the field, because sadly what we've also seen has been an uptick in poaching.
I mean, it's so easy to sit here and say, the rangers put their lives on the line each and every day. It was a couple of years ago at one of the Tusk events, and you had a roll of honour.
Yes.
And I remember sat there and thought, I'd just be interested, I'll count the names. And it ran into 70 or 80 people had lost their lives in the line of duty in a single year. That's right. Including two, I think they were Western environmentalists who were deliberately targeted and murdered. So they're not caught in crossfire, things like that. No, they were deliberately targeted because they were doing work.
Yeah, exactly.
I was staggered.
It is, and actually,
I found it incredibly moving.
Yesterday, the latest figure I've heard for the last year was 140.
140.
140. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I can't remember exactly what the figures are for how many servicemen we've lost in places like Afghanistan, but I don't think it was anything like as high as 140.
And it's constant. I mean, it was 2 years ago. I think it was in the 80s. And now you say it's 140, and that's every single year that's happening.
It is. Yeah.
Just shows you how desperate the situation must be.
No, it is. I mean, and there are pockets where it's very volatile. The DRC, the Congo, is particularly bad, and because those rangers are not only working in dangerous circumstances, but they've got the added issue of sort of militia and guerrillas who are armed guerrillas who are have got political motives,
and
over the years we've seen armed rebels and militias using the illegal wildlife trade as a means to
generate
finance
income. Absolutely. In the same way that in South America it might be drugs, or but they're going to find any way to finance what attempt to finance what they're doing. So I think it's worth touching upon the Tusk Awards, because it is, certainly for Jazz and myself, we're very lucky. We've been along for the last couple of years, and it is an incredible event, incredibly moving as well. And it's where you celebrate local.
Yes, it's this sort of the unsung heroes of conservation.
And then generally there's a ranger or two in there.
Yes, so we have 3 awards that we dish out. The Wildlife Ranger Award, which was an initiative actually that Prince William personally rang me up and said, I think we've got to do something for rangers. He said, can we introduce an award for rangers? And,
So how does that? Sorry, I'm really intrigued now. How does that work? Did he just sort of ring you up out of the blue, or is it an arranged telephone call?
No. He does catch me out sometimes.
He does ring you
and he
up.
just rings on. Here's William here, and
You've got a specific ringtone for him.
And that's what's so good about him. Actually, is he's very proactive in engagement in the charity and in the conservation world. You know, he might ping me a message or whatever it is saying, have you seen this? What do you know? You know, what do you know about this? And you know,
That's quite impressive.
and he's always hungry for information actually. So yeah, no, he's fantastic. But he was behind the Ranger Award. And then we've got two other awards. One which is sponsored by Land Rover, the Tusk Award, which is for what we call an emerging leader in conservation. And then we have the Prince William Award, which is a Lifetime Achievement Award. We're now in our 8th year of the awards. I'm not quite sure exactly what shape they're going to take this year.
Well, who knows what's going on tomorrow?
We're hoping to have some sort of...
Because it's normally towards the end of the year, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we are hoping that we will be able to have some sort of physical event. It might become a hybrid where it's partly online as well. But so we'll wait to see. But we've done the judging for this year's, and the film crews are just about to go out and make the little films that we make of each of the
which are incredible. Just a little snippets of what these people are doing, quite often against overwhelming odds. And there's never a lack of enthusiasm. These guys and ladies are going out in their own fields, whatever it may be. So, you know, some are literally in the field, some are doing research, some are, it is
inspiring. I'm always really humbled by those awards and you know the men and women that we identify, and it's and we try. I mean, we as judges we try and pick out people who've not been recognised. There are a number of quite well recognised conservationists, quite well known. Like Jane Goodall or what So these awards are trying to pick out, as I say, the unsung heroes, because there are some remarkable people out there that just day in, day out do this incredible work.
No, it's because I met some of them last year, and it's. I think this is always an indicator. I forget what the guy's name is. Anyway, Jazz and I were chatting to him, and inside of a few seconds, he somehow completely turned the conversation around.
Yeah.
And I find myself talking about myself. I mean, partly because perhaps I'm egotistical like that, but he was so humble, and he was profoundly embarrassed almost that he was gaining any sort of attention for what he just deemed to be what needs to be done. It's outstanding.
But what is and what's really fantastic about the awards is again that the interest that Prince William takes in that, and normally what we try and do is, because as you've been to the awards ceremony, it's quite a big sort of glitzy sort of event, and they get a moment with Prince William at the awards. So what he's done very sweetly on a number of occasions is he's invited them to Kensington Palace to come and have tea. So that he's met them the day before the awards, and been able to just enjoy having a private conversation with them.
Nice.
And I know that they really appreciate that. It means a lot to them. That they've had and had his interest and support.
That's really cool. So as we begin to come out of sort of lockdown and COVID, certainly in this country, I have to confess, it sounds like it's still a bit of a minefield over in Africa right now. And of course, attention does need to, is that careful balance between wildlife conservation, but also the human population conservation. And I should imagine now that a lot of politicians over there are looking at the latter rather than the former right now. But short to medium term, what does the future of Tusk look like coming out of, or still to some extent in COVID?
For us as an organisation, when we went into lockdown, because we raised quite a lot of money through events like the marathon, whatever, it looked like a nightmare for us. And so we immediately wrote off 2 million of event income that we'd sort of budgeted for.
Wow.
But actually, we turned the marathon into the virtual marathon. That's done pretty well. It hasn't raised as much, but it's
it's done pretty well. I mean, if it's 300,000, it's
and we've got a crisis appeal that we've got out at the moment, which we are. I think we're at about £700,000 raised through that, which is fantastic. And we've got a donor with a match on that, so that's really brilliant. So actually, fun enough, I've got sort of higher hopes now for this year than we originally thought. And by the way, this year is our 30th anniversary. So, all our plans for celebrating, they all went out the window as well. But I think that both from our perspective and I know other conservation NGOs in our space and our project partners on the ground in Africa are actually sort of almost more worried about next year, because we think we can sort of muddle through this year, but none of us really know yet how. We're all anticipating it's going to be a very deep recession, across the world. So, how deep are people's pockets going to be in wishing to support
wildlife,
conservation so that's is more of a worry. In Africa, I mean, interesting, the virus itself has not really taken hold in a major way yet. South Africa's got problems, but
I've got South African friends. It sounds like it.
Yeah,
they've had a really hard lockdown.
Yes,
been super tight, which has caused urban unrest. By the sounds
exactly.
of it. It's been quite complicated.
But in a way, the problem for Africa is more of an economic problem at the moment because of the global lockdowns and travel restrictions, and it's really severely hitting the continent in that way. And when you talk to people in the travel industry, many of them would say they don't anticipate the safari tourism business sort of bouncing back probably for a couple of years, maybe 3 years. It'll take a while for that to come back, and particularly for them, American tourists are an important part of their market, and I think there's a real sense that they may not get.
And it's going to be multiple levels, isn't it? I mean, you got a recession coming up. People are still fearful of travel.
Yeah.
We don't quite know what's going to happen in Africa. Is it going to spike beyond, behind the rest of the world?
Exactly.
Is it going to spike at all? I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Is there going to be a vaccination? And to a certain extent, it's similar with what I do with business. Nobody is really committing to anything because it is currently so fluid.
Yeah.
And it must be a nightmare for you. It's certainly a nightmare for me in terms of planning. We just can't plan for anything. I'm juggling about 16 different plates, hoping that one of them is going to land.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, exactly. And so I think that, certainly all of our partners that we work with, they've all had to slash their budgets dramatically, cut their cloth accordingly, trying to keep at the very least, as I say, the rangers out on the front line, so you've got that level of security in place. But
it must be so infuriating, because it's out of all the things which is worth investing the time and energy on, the environment, wildlife conservation, it's got to be at the forefront. Because we could save the population, but if the population have nothing to live on, if the planet dies, doesn't matter how many vaccines we have or how many cancer cures we have, because the planet's gone, the environment's gone.
And of course, ironically, this pandemic is a zoonotic disease that transferred from wildlife, and it did that transfer. I mean, we still don't know the exact details yet, but it transferred because of human
tampering
with nature and wildlife, and our arrogance and
Well,
our own behaviour is what created this.
I mean, if nothing else, I think human society is pretty good at the whole arrogance level of certainly of thinking. Now, there's just a couple of more things. When very conscious of your time, you've generated this, the time in your busy diary to drive all the way up here and be with us today. Is education, isn't it? That's the key to conservation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great getting rangers out there, and I know there is the flip side where hundreds of rangers die each year, and God knows how many get injured in the line of work. And that's, in one way, that's almost the glamorous side. I know it's the terrible side as well, but it is a glamour.
Yeah.
But it's education that seems to me to be
Education's absolutely
key to conservation.
Yeah, it is.
And you guys are quite heavily involved in that.
Yes, we are. So we invest quite a significant proportion of our funds are directed towards education. It's sort of has always been one of the main pillars of Tusk's sort of ethos or approach towards conservation, and we do it in a couple of ways. We support a number of really dynamic, brilliant environmental education centres, which some of them have up to 20,000 kids come through a year, and they do these sort of residential courses of sort of 4 or 5 days where they are immersed into the bush. And again, these are kids who have been brought out of the city, and they are immersed.
That's got to be quite intimidating.
No, I think for some of them, and it's just, for a lot of them, it's the first time they've seen a wild animal or whatever. So they have this incredible experience, and they are, taught so much about the importance of the environment to them, and their livelihoods, and the value of nature, so we support a number of those sort of environmental education centres, and they're, I always love going to them because it's very infectious when you're amongst all these kids, just wide-eyed and sort of soaking it all up.
I mean, it's super infectious. Just going to the Cotswold Wildlife Park. I mean, we used to go all the time before my two went sort of properly into school. And there was always a hum of excitement at home when they knew they were going to the wildlife park. Yeah. And then I think it reached a crescendo last year when you kind of, the baby rhino, and we were with one of the keepers, and the children just could not believe it. They were buzzing. Like I've never seen them before. And it comes back to that connection, the education, the connection with the wildlife, to actually be invested in it. That's got to be the key.
So we've got two other ways we approach education. We've got an initiative which we created a number of years ago with the support of Vodafone, actually.
Having lost my phone the other day, I spent an hour. Actually, they were very good about things, but I spent quite a lot of time with Vodafone.
Well, their foundation.
I'm sure they're absolutely
their foundation was brilliant.
I spend enough with them, so I'm through my contract with Vodafone. I'm helping support Tusk. That makes me feel a little bit better.
No, they've got a brilliant foundation. Actually, does all sorts of amazing stuff. But they backed an initiative we put to them, which was a Pan-African environmental education program. We made a whole series of short films, educational films, and there's a book and there's a whole teacher's pack, and it looks at. It's not just about wildlife conservation. It's about it's about passing on solutions to everyday problems that these that sort of rural Africans in particular, but also urban and marine communities live with on a day-to-day basis. Because what happened was, over the years, we would visit a community and they would be struggling with, it could be water pollution, it could be soil erosion, they were cutting down too many trees for fuel for their fires or whatever. And every now and then you'd come across a community, you'd come across a really brilliant, very simple idea to solve whatever problem they had. And yet you go, 5 miles down the road, and the next door community's got exactly the same problem, but they've got no idea. So there's no transfer of information.
Wow.
So we created this, this thing, and it's been absolutely brilliant. And I think we've now reached well over 500,000 kids being used to this.
500,000?
Yeah. And so that's something which I'm very proud of. But another interesting way we support education is that where you've got a reserve or a conservancy and you've got communities that are living around it, that, as I was saying earlier, it's so important that you engage with those communities so that they feel that they derive a real value out of the conservation of the area that they're living around. And so, for instance, through the Labour Marathon, we fund, and support the refurbishment of schools in the communities around. So they feel really invested in the success of Labour, and they can understand, if Labour's succeeding, we succeed, we get the benefits. So at one point, there was one school a little bit further from Labour that hadn't received any support at all, and it became evident that poachers were using that community to sort of to hide, if you like, and to
Is that because they hadn't received any support? There's an animosity towards.
Yeah, I guess so. And the poachers may not have actually come from that community, but they knew that they would be, safeguarded in that area. But the moment we put support into that school, and it was considerable support, it was like the tap was turned off, and because suddenly that community realised that it was in their interest to look after. The protection of the rhino and the Labour Conservancy.
The power of doing good.
And it's amazing the power that by supporting the communities and the livelihoods, you can really engender a significant goodwill towards the wildlife and the community, the natural habitat.
Wow. Now, honestly, Charlie, I could talk to you all day, all night long, but at some stage we do have to bring this home. But there's so much I want to talk about. There's so much I feel that I need to know and be educated about. There's a couple of things. I'm curious about what I presume they're strong, but I'm curious what your links are like with, because there are a lot of African wildlife conservation charities of various sorts, and I know you've got very close links with Cotswold Wildlife Block, Longleat, Woburn. Do you work hand in hand? I assume that you collaborate with.
Yes, we do.
The likes of WWF or.
Yeah, no. So we do. I mean, actually, driving up here today, I was, hands-free, talking to.
Obviously, in the Land Rover. They were a ruthless plug for our friends at Land Rover.
I was talking to one of the senior guys from FFI, about a collaboration. So. It is, this comes up quite a lot. People sort of wonder, there seem to be a plethora of conservation organisations, and and they're all doing great work. To be honest with you, we, because we're not a huge organisation, we're not WWF. By very nature, we need to collaborate, and a lot of the projects that we support. We can't fund outright 100% of their budgets, operating budgets. So we end up being normally a consortium of funders, and it could include American donors as well, often does, include American organizations. So we are often co-funding projects together. And I think it's really, really important actually that and this initiative that we're doing for rangers that we'll announce shortly, that will be it's very collaborative. We're trying to bring in a number of different organizations as well as the travel industry. To really get behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming it's one of those things that it's the collective, and the collective is always going to be stronger. Yeah. And it brings in different ideas and thinking and visions, so it put it into the melting pot, and all of a sudden you have, hopefully, viable solutions for the continued conservation of what is. Well, I mean, but words fail me in terms of how important it is.
We all work in slightly different ways, and we all have different address books that we sort of tap into. I mean, the one thing that I think has always benefited Tusk is that one, we've always taken this collaborative approach, but mainly because we've remained pretty small, and as we're not a bureaucratic monster at all. We have a very small team primarily based in Dorset. There are 12 of us running the organisation. And it means that we're light on our feet, and our overhead is kept to the minimum, so we can really maximise the investment into the field and the impact that we're having. And long may that continue as far as I'm concerned. That's always been,
Yeah, it's being agile and dexterous, so you can move quickly as and when a
Yeah.
new crisis or whatever description
exactly,
comes up.
exactly.
So we got to, as I say, we got to bring this home. But the last couple of things: what gets Charlie out of bed in the morning? And I don't mean the smell of Kenyan coffee filtering up from downstairs. I mean, where does the drive come from after 30 years of fighting? And I use the term fighting to a certain extent against the tide, because we do see, you've seen it yourself, that African wildlife is being slaughtered around us. Its habitat is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Where's that continued drive?
I think I draw my energy and my strength and sort of, I suppose, inspiration from the people we work with on the ground in Africa, and the I could point to any number of really significant successes where we have helped, and played a part in turning the tide and stopping that erosion, and we've seen recoveries in populations in those areas, And so, to me, there is still hope. We've still got time to stop this erosion of landscape and habitat and wildlife, and I've always said to be a conservationist, you've got to be an optimist. So for me, the way I look at the world is it can never get worse, and if it does get worse, well, it can't get any worse than that. It's always going to get better, and so I have this sort of, perhaps sort of naive belief that you can do good in this world and you can turn things around, and certainly when I look at any number of our project partners, I've seen some amazing success and achievements, and so that's where I draw my strength from, I suppose.
Well, I mean, it is quite remarkable. I mean, your relentless energy. I mean, whenever I've seen you, you're bouncing around. You're either with royalty or you're with the Land Rover girls. Unfortunately, being led astray.
My wife is watching. She's gonna quiz me about that.
Honestly, it was all totally innocent. And now I completely lost my train of thought. There was one last thing I was going. Oh, that was it. And I think this is probably quite pertinent to the next generation coming through as well. Knowing what you do know now, what would you say to that younger Charlie as he was contemplating throwing himself into conservation?
It's interesting. I've had that question before, and so I feel I was lucky that I had a bit of a commercial life before I went into the third sector, into charity. And I think that's really stood me in great stead. I think it's, for anyone running a charity, I think it's really important you have a sense of how the commercial world exists and what makes them tick. Because ultimately, if you're going out asking for money,
you got to know how to use
You've got to understand what their motivation is to give it and to support you. So for my kids who have often expressed an interest in perhaps working for Tusk at some point in the future, I've said, yeah, but go off and do something, sort of make a living in the commercial world first before, because I think then you can add a lot more value to the charity and so in that, I don't know if that answers your question, but in a more general sense, what I would say to young people is, and I do believe this, that anyway they've got it, is that they are so much more alive to the need to protect the environment and to look after the natural world than our generation was, and certainly our parents' generation was. And I pray that governments and leaders take greater note of we've got to turn the tide. We've got to. The planet cannot continue to sustain itself if we carry on abusing it in the way that we've come so used to doing.
It's significant change, isn't it? There's the way that we approach our lives, and I hold my hand up. I'm guilty. I fly. I've got to drive, and we all are. But there is opportunity for us to change, and I think, as you succinctly said, and unless we do change, the abuse of the planet is going to continue, and in the not too distant future, certainly my children may never see big game or big animals, megafauna in the wildlife. Yeah, which will be
it's changing fast, and this pandemic has to me has provided a moment for the human race to really stop and think, and because it has been obviously a truly global pandemic, and so hopefully that a number of the way we do things will change, and I'm not sitting here being sanctimonious saying that I should not fly or anything like that. I couldn't get to Africa if I didn't fly, so but we have got to think more responsibly about, I think, a lot of things that we do.
Well, I can't think of a better way of rounding this up. Charlie, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know you had about a 2-hour drive to get here.
Yes.
And you were quite forceful in saying that actually it will be far more impactful, meter apart, but you are absolutely right. And yeah, hey, wow, I think what you do is stunning. I think the way you go about it is humble and inspirational, and certainly you've inspired my 2 children, who I don't think they've ever met you yet, but no. they know all about you. Well, they know all about Tusk.
Yeah,
I think they perhaps will question it when they're running around the fields in the rain, but their smiles said it all. So certainly from Team Cool, the family, I'd like to say thanks for everything you've done over the last 30 years. It is stunning. Yeah, very, very
appreciate
impressive.
I've enjoyed it enormously. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, there you go. That's Charlie and his incredible work, absolutely incredible work at Tusk. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to find Tusk. Just Google it, find their incredible work. And I know I do say this a lot, but if you do have any loose change, and no times are hard, I'm sure that Charlie, his team, African Wildlife per se would welcome it, or simply show support. So kind of let them know that you're there, perhaps retweet stuff, social media. There's lots and lots of ways that we can get involved, because as Charlie put it, we are fighting against the tide, the abuse of the planet. There's only so much time that we do have left with our fantastic wildlife on the planet. From me and from Charlie and the team here at the Barn Theatre, I'd like to say thank you once again for joining us at Cool Conversations. As lockdown eases, 1 or 2 people have been asking, will we continue? Well, the simple answer is yes, we will. We're not giving up in the same way that Charlie hasn't given up in his 30-year battle for African wildlife. So join me again next week, same time, same place. It's Thursday, 1800 British Summer Time here at the Barn Theatre. We see you next week. Thank you.